Despite only containing 3 major events, the Pact, the Andal Invasion, and the Long Night, the timeline of ancient Westeros is riddled with inconsistencies. Knights existing thousands of years before they came to Westeros, the others hating iron, despite the first men having only bronze, a mysterious metal called dragon steel in a time supposedly before Valyria, and a war between the Andals and the Children of the Forest, despite existing thousands of years apart. These inconsistencies are not lost on the characters in our story, as shown in a conversation between Jon and Sam in A Dance of Dragons. The first men only left us runes on rocks, so everything we think we know about the Age of Heroes and the Dawn Age and the Long Night comes from accounts set down by Septons thousands of years later. There are archmaesters at the Citadel who question all of it. Those old histories are full of kings who reigned for hundreds of years, and knights riding around 1,000 years before there were knights. You know the tales. Brandon the Builder, Simeon Star-Eyes, Night's King. We say you were the 998th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, but the oldest list I found shows 674 commanders, which suggests that it was written during long ago, Jon broke in. What about the others? While this conversation covers several topics, it boils down to 3 main points. The chronology of the Age of Heroes and Long Night was written down by Andals / the Faith of the Seven several thousand years after the fact. 2. The chronology is actively questioned by the Citadel. 3. The earliest records of the Night's Watch come from roughly the same time as some important event, probably the Long Night. Additionally, problems with the chronology include 1. Historical figures living unnaturally long lives, 2. Historical events happening out of order, and also an explicit mention of Night's King, which means we can probably assume this has something to do with the Long Night. And elsewhere, there is this book called True History which keeps on giving different accounts on when things happened. The evidence is clear. Something is wrong with the timeline, but what exactly? Well, I and others believe that most of the timeline inconsistencies can be explained if, rather than happening thousands of years apart, the Andal Invasion and the Long Night actually happened concurrently, with the former causing the latter. Simply put, the Andal Invasion caused the Long Night. Since claiming the Andals caused the greatest catastrophe in Westerosi, if not world history, is a rather damning accusation, and the historical sources don't mention anything of the sort, this also implies the Septons, the writers of ancient histories, purposely obscured the truth to hide their faith's culpability. Septons, after all, are priests of the Faith of the Seven, and the Faith of the Seven is the religion of the Andals. At a glance, such changes to the historical record could also explain many of the timeline inconsistencies. After all, if our histories were changed to say the Gospels happened in 333 BCE instead of 33 CE, future historians might wonder why Paul the Apostle seemed to live for hundreds of years and what the Roman Empire was doing in Judea centuries before the Roman Empire existed. But great claims require great evidence, and getting to the bottom of this requires us to know several things. 1. When was the Andal Invasion? 2. When was the Long Night? 3. Did the Andal Invasion and the Long Night coincide with each other? And 4. If they did the Andal Invasion cause the Long Night? Let us begin. Timestamps are in the description. We are first introduced to the Andal Invasion in Bran 4, A Game of Thrones. In it, Old Nan tells Bran that the Andals are an ethnic group distinct from the Rhoynar or First Men, that the Andals migrated to Westeros, and by the time they arrived, the Children of the Forest lived only in their wooden cities and hollow hills. This cultural difference matters. Being distinct from the Rhoynar and First Men, Andals have their own laws, their own religion, their own customs, and use different materials to make things. Andal inheritance traditions, for instance, contributed to the Dance of the Dragons. As for faith, Andal worship of the Seven involves special oils, crystals, incense, and song. This contrasts with First Men worship of the old gods, which involves weirwoods, heart trees, and blood sacrifice. As for the Andal's homeland, Andalos, it was located in western Essos, roughly between modern Pentos and the Bravosian coast. We also learned that, in Andalos, the Andals were one of the first peoples to adopt iron metallurgy. The fact that the Andals forged iron has been taken by some as proof that the Seven guided them, that the smith himself taught them this art, and so do the holy texts teach. But the Rhoynar were already an advanced civilization at this time, and they too knew of iron, so it takes only the study of a map to realize that the earliest Andals must have had contact with the Rhoynar. It would not have been the first time that men learned the working of iron from the Rhoynar. It is said that the Valyrians learned the art from them as well, although the Valyrians eventually surpassed them. In other words, the Rhoynar were likely the first people to develop iron weapons and tools. The Valyrians and Andals were also early adopters, though the Valyrians eventually surpassed the rest in skill, likely referring to the creation of Valyrian steel. This all contrasts with the First Men, who were known for using bronze, not iron. But some 12,000 years ago, the First Men appeared from the east, crossing the broken arm of Dorne before it was broken. They came with bronze swords and great leathern shields, riding horses. Nor could the First Men match the zeal of the invaders, and their bronze axes and burnies of bronze scales proved less than equal to the steel swords and iron ringmail of the Andals. In fact, we are repeatedly told that bronze, not iron, was the metal of the First Men. The ancient armor of House Royce, a First Men house, is bronze. Bronze is the metal used in ancient sacrifices to the old gods. Bronze is the metal of the crown of the Kings of Winter. In fact, the Andal Iron, First Men Bronze dichotomy is so important it is one of the three things Jojen and Mira swear by to Bran. "I swear it by earth and water," said the boy in green. "I swear it by bronze and iron," his sister said. "We swear it by ice and fire." Bronze and iron is placed on a similar level of importance to ice and fire, the series title. This is only part of it. Like bronze, runes are repeatedly brought up as a distinct part of First Men culture, whether on the Royce's armor, the crown of the Kings of Winter, or on rocks. The ancestral seat of House Royce, a First Men house, is even called Runestone. And if the Royces seem surprisingly emblematic of the First Men, remember that the fight with the others in the Game of Thrones prologue is between the others and Waymar Royce. Regardless, this all contrasts runes, a technology of the First Men, with writing, a technology of the Andals. There is one notable exception to this Andal Iron First Men Bronze dichotomy. Iron, specifically iron swords, are repeatedly associated with the ancient Stark, that is to say, First Men, Kings of Winter, both on their tombs and on their crown. That being said, Caitlin remarks that the crown's bronze and iron were the metals of winter, dark and strong to fight against the cold. Whether it be cold things, cold demons, cold gods, or cold winds, cold, in the abstract, almost always refers to the others. So Caitlin is really saying bronze and iron, dark and strong to fight against the others. Iron is also thought to have some kind of anti-spiritual property, useful for fighting the undead, as it supposedly keeps the spirits of the Kings of Winter in their tombs. Taken together, the iron swords seem to symbolize some kind of alliance between the Andals and First Men against the others. More on that later. In summary, at some point in the past, the Andals, a culture with iron and writing, invaded Westeros and warred against the First Men, a culture with only bronze and runes. When bronze and iron appear together, it seems to represent some kind of unified front against the others. But when did this all happen? Well, in Daenerys II, A Storm of Swords, we learn that Valyria rose and defeated Old Gis 5,000 years ago. Old Gis had fallen 5,000 years ago, if she remembered true, its legion shattered by the might of young Valyria, its brick walls pulled down, its streets and buildings turned to ash and cinder by dragon flame, its very fields sown with salt, sulfur, and skulls. The World of Ice and Fire elaborates on this, stating that the Andals fled to Westeros to escape the Valyrians. At the mouth of the Rhoyne, the Valyrians founded the first of their colonies. It is likely the Andals chose to flee rather than face the inevitable slavery that came with the Valyrian conquest. They sailed in great numbers across the narrow sea to the lands of the First Men in Westeros. From Andalos, the Andals then landed in the Vale, something attested to by septons, singers, and maesters, an undisputed historical fact. The Vale has also been continuously ruled by the Arryns, a house of purportedly pure Andal stock. Regardless, this 5,000-year figure is rather intriguing. While seemingly vague, 5,000 years ago is actually a rather specific point in history, as it only appears a handful of times in our story. Besides for the fall of Old Gis and the Andal Invasion, 5,000 years ago was the time of Euron Redhand and when the Summer Islands first began their military tradition, likely due to wars against Valyria. It is when House Burrell, a Vale and therefore likely Andal house, gained their webbed fingers, likely when they first came to Westeros, and finally, it is when the prophecy of Azor Ahai first emerged. More on these later, especially those two bits about Euron Redhand and Azor Ahai. Another thing of note is how long the Andal Invasion took. According to the World of Ice and Fire, it took 1,000 years for the Andal Invasion to reach the Iron Islands, and to this day, the Ironborn are intolerant towards the Faith of the Seven. This matters because, in his duel against Ser Archie's Arryn during the Andal Invasion, Robar Royce of the First Men used a Valyrian steel weapon. While the specifics can be argued over, the core point stays the same. Due to its length and the numerous conflicts between the First Men and the Andals, the Andal Invasion of Westeros coincided with the diffusion of Valyrian steel weapons into the continent, with these weapons not always being held by Andals. Yet again, more on that later. Now, there are some in-universe texts that refute this whole chronology, most notably true history. For now, though, we have a pretty clear picture. 5,000 years ago, the Andals fled the Valyrian Empire and went to Westeros. They landed in the Vale, bringing with them iron tools, writing, and the Faith of the Seven, putting them at odds with the First Men's bronze, runes, and worship of the old gods. A slow conquest followed, alongside a diffusion of Valyrian steel weapons into Westeros, though we don't know for sure if they were brought by the Andals or someone like, say, Valyrian traders. There is also something in there about an alliance between the Andals and the First Men to fight the others, represented by the bronze and iron crown of the Kings of Winter, and the iron swords in the crypts of Winterfell. With that in mind, let's move on to the Long Night. Unlike the Andal Invasion, we learn the purported date of the Long Night as early as Catelyn won A Game of Thrones. The others are as dead as the Children of the Forest, gone 8,000 years. Maester Luwin will tell you they never lived at all. Again, in Jon 7, we are told the Long Night happened 8,000 years ago, not once, but twice. The others are only a story, a tale to make children shiver. If they ever lived at all, they are gone 8,000 years. The Long Night has come before. Oh, 8,000 years is a good while, to be sure. Yet the Night's Watch does not remember. Who will? Similar to 5,000, 8,000 years ago is a rather specific point in history. The Long Night happening 8,000 years ago puts it at the same age as the Wall, the Night's Watch, and the Starks. This, of course, shouldn't be too surprising. Barring some more fantastical explanation, the Night's Watch and Wall were purportedly created to protect against the others. Night's King, the 13th Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, if not a Stark himself, was at least defeated by one. We even know that the Night's Watch existed during the Long Night, and is implied to have been created during it, or at least during an event around the time of the Long Night. It's all rather coherent, and implies some degree of causation between the Long Night, the founding of the Night's Watch, the creation of the Wall, Night's King, and the first Starks. That much I do not doubt. So the Long Night happened 8,000 years ago. Not so fast. Let's return to that Sam quote from A Dance with Dragons. In it, Sam mentions how there is a disconnect between the events lived by ancient peoples and the accounts written by septons millennia after the fact. In a pre-literate society, such as that of the First Men, instead of writing, oral tradition would preserve history through bards and singers. In fact, singers are routinely mentioned as future sources on current events, whether it be the War of the Five Kings, the Battle of the Blackwater, or a hypothetical duel between Brynden Tully and Jaime Lannister. Singers also seem to be particularly skilled at recording cultural memories that would otherwise die off, particularly those relating to the others, and the Long Night. Simeon's star eyes has sapphire eyes, like the sapphire eyes of Othor and Jaffer after they become whites. Serwyn's shield is a mirror, like how the other's armor reflects the colors of the surrounding forest. The rat cook of the Night Fort is white and eats children, like the weirwood-faced black gate beneath the Night Fort's kitchen. These examples also highlight how singers, that is to say, oral history, seems to be a core part of First Men culture, a culture that originally lacked written history or the septons and maesters to write it down. Bale the Bard, a legend about a singer, is common among the wildlings of First Men people. Mance Rayder, king beyond the wall, styles himself as a bard. The children of the forest, a key part of the old gods' religion, refer to themselves as singers. In fact, oral and written histories are often brought up as things in conflict with each other, likely due to giving conflicting accounts on how things happened. Luwin, a maester, dismisses the legends of singers. The World of Ice and Fire highlights that singers, maesters, and septons all agree that the Andals first landed in the Vale, as if such an agreement is rare. And when a member of the Wildlings, a mainly non-literate society, is shown a written account of events, he immediately suggests that the history presented is fabricated. Tormund Thunderfist has better things to do than make papers talk at him. Might be all a skin of lies. If I had me a nice goose quill and a pot of maester's ink, I could write down that me member was long and thick as me arm. Wouldn't make it so. So, am I saying that the septons and maesters changed the histories to hide when the Long Night happened? Actually, I don't need to. Characters in our story already think that the powers that be are conspiring by changing records and manipulating history, even if these powers that be are the maesters, and not explicitly the septons. If I were queen, the first thing I would do would be to kill all those grey rats. They scurry everywhere, whispering in the ears of their masters. But who are the masters, and who are the servants, truly? The grey rats read and write our letters. Who can say for certainty that they are not twisting the words for their own ends? Who do you think killed all the dragons the last time around? The world the Citadel is building has no place in it for sorcery or prophecy or glass candles, much less for dragons. Ask yourself why Aemon Targaryen was allowed to waste his life upon the wall, when by rights he should have been raised Archmaester. His blood was why he could not be trusted, no more than I can. Even so, it should be noted that our initial 8,000-year figure likely comes from Luwin, the Winterfell Maester, and that the Septons and Maesters are both based out of Oldtown. Luwin's history is also plainly wrong, as while Luwin says the others never existed, just 2 chapters earlier we are shown that the others do, in fact, exist. But, is there an actual text we can point to that hides a possible connection between the Andal Invasion and the Long Night, either by pushing the Long Night further back in time, or pulling the Andal Invasion forward? Yes. Yes, there is. It's called True History, and has been brought up a couple of times already. While it appears only around 4 times, each is rather telling. First, True History claims that the Long Night happened 8,000 years ago, with it already brought up that this refutes an earlier chronology of only 6,000. It seems that, for whoever says the Long Night and surrounding events happened 8,000 years ago, True History was their source. Second, True History claims Alyssa Arryn lived 4,000 years ago instead of 6,000 years ago, contrary to the suggestions of other sources. Third, True History claims the Children of the Forest had already abandoned the Riverlands by the time of the Andal Invasion, in refutation of the Singer's oral history. Finally, True History suggests that the Blackwood-Bracken feud began 1,000 years before the Andal Invasion, where other sources say only 500. It also says that the Andal Invasion only happened 4,000 years ago instead of the calculated 5. So, several things are happening here. Without True History, the chronology presented is that the Long Night and surrounding events happened 6,000 years ago. The Arryns were also living in the Vale 6,000 years ago. The Children of the Forest were still present in the Riverlands during the Andal Invasion. The Blackwood-Bracken feud began only 500 years before the Andal Invasion, and the Andal Invasion itself happened somewhere, though with Andal Arryns in the Vale at least 6,000 years ago, the same time as the Long Night. With True History, the chronology presented is that the Long Night happened 8,000 years ago, the Andals were living in the Vale only 4,000 years ago, the Children of the Forest had departed from the Riverlands by the time of the Andal Invasion, The Blackwood-Bracken feud began 1,000 years before the Andal Invasion, and the Andal Invasion itself happened also 4,000 years ago. In every single instance, true history either pushes back in time events before the Andal Invasion, or pulls the Andal Invasion forward in time, specifically from the estimated 5,000 years ago to only 4,000 years ago. After all, there can't be Aarons in the Vale before the Andal Invasion. As for the other figures of 3,000 years ago for Alyssa Arryn and 2,000 years for the Andal Invasion, these can be chalked up to a later source trying to pull the Andal Invasion even further forward in time. Since these dates are both exactly half of true histories, they likely come from the same source. Finally, given the pile of timeline changes and how they conflict with previous chronologies, naming the work True History is quite ironic. You might as well name it Fabricated History. So, do we actually have an estimation of when the Long Night happened? Kind of. Returning to Jon 2: A Dance with Dragons, we learn that in a purported 8,000 years, there have only been 998 Lord Commanders. Assuming a relatively unbroken line of Lord Commanders, this means each Lord Commander held the position for about 8.016 years. In the series, we also get the names of several Lord Commanders and their tenures. They are Night's King, at 13 years, Obert Caswell, 9 years, Osric Stark, 60 years, Brynden Rivers, 13 years, Jeor Mormont, 12 years, and Jon Snow, less than 1 year. A median of 12.5 years, accounting for the two outliers of 60 years and only a few months. Applying both metrics to Sam's figure of 674 Lord Commanders, we can estimate for the Night's Watch being founded and the Long Night therefore happening somewhere between 5,403 and 8,425 years ago, the former being roughly the time of the Andal Invasion. We also have out-of-universe sources. In an Entertainment Weekly article about a possible show set in the Long Night, George R. Martin said, 10,000 years is mentioned in the novels, but you also have places where maesters say, no, it wasn't 10,000, it was 5,000. I think it's closer to 5,000 years. Around the Long Night, Valyria had hardly begun to rise yet with its dragons and the great empire that it built. Then, in a 2018 interview with John Hodgman, Martin said the show would be set 5 to 10,000 years ago. So, when did the Long Night happen? Short answer, we don't know. We are initially told 8,000 years ago, but this figure appears to come from a revisionist source. 6,000 years is also possible, but we have no reason to trust it over any other source. From calculations based on the numbers available, anything between 5,000 and 8,000 years is also possible. Finally, Martin has insinuated that the Long Night happened 5,000 years ago instead of 10,000 years ago, even if in the text 10,000 years ago never actually refers to a possible date for the Long Night. Regardless, we are pretty sure that the Long Night coincided with the foundation of House Stark, the creation of the Wall, and that the Night's Watch was founded during some important event, most likely the Long Night. Finally, there seems to be a concerted effort to hide when exactly the Long Night happened, both by pushing the Long Night back in time and pulling the Andal Invasion forward. But is there any evidence the Long Night and Andal Invasion actually happened around the same time? Since what we're doing here is effectively archaeology, time to think like an archaeologist. In archaeology, context is dated by how it compares to contexts with similar material culture, buildings, tools, vessels, etc. Likewise, an undisturbed context can never be older than the youngest artifact in it. If a Roman coin and a medieval coin are found next to each other, the context cannot be older than the medieval period. This is called the law of superposition. So, are there any pieces of material culture that appeared during the Long Night, but only arrived in Westeros during the Andal Invasion? If so, the Long Night must have happened at least during the Andal Invasion, if not later. Well, in Jon 2: A Dance with Dragons, Sam mentions the last hero's sword of Dragonsteel, reportedly able to slay others. The armor of the others is proof against most ordinary blades, if the tales can be believed, and their own swords are so cold they shatter steel. Fire will dismay them though, and they are vulnerable to obsidian. I found one account of the Long Night that spoke of the last hero slaying the others with a blade of dragonsteel. Supposedly, they could not stand against it. Dragonsteel? The term was new to Jon. Valyrian steel? That was my first thought as well. This is rather fascinating. According to legend, the last hero fought against the others during the Long Night and has analogues in other cultures, most notably Azor Ahai, with the last hero's dragonsteel sword being analogous to Azor Ahai's Lightbringer. If the wall falls, night falls as well, the long night that never ends. It must not happen, will not happen. The Lord of Light has seen his children in their peril and sent a champion to them, Azor Ahai reborn. If the last hero's dragonsteel is in fact Valyrian steel, the last hero could not have lived more than 5,000 years ago, the same time as the birth of the Valyrian Empire, the same time as the Andal Invasion, the same time as the Long Night, and the same time as the prophecy of Azor Ahai, which likely would have been created immediately after the Long Night. It's all rather neat. But is dragonsteel Valyrian steel? Our characters certainly think so, although our characters are wrong about a lot of things. Funnily enough, this conversation mentioning dragonsteel is one of the few times we get the same conversation told from different perspectives in the whole story. Though the term dragonsteel is new to Jon, Sam makes no comment on it himself. Regardless, the next and only other mention of dragonsteel comes in Jon 12, A Dance with Dragons. We will see, Jon thought, remembering the things that Sam had told him, the things he'd found in his old books. Longclaw had been forged in the fires of old Valyria, forged in dragonflame and set with spells. Dragonsteel, Sam called it. Stronger than any common steel, lighter, harder, sharper. But words in a book were one thing. The true test came in battle. Sadly, this only tells us Jon thinks Valyrian steel is dragonsteel, and Jon also thought neglecting the food situation wouldn't come back to stab him in the gut. To Jon's credit, the iron swords in the Winterfell crypts appear to have some anti-supernatural property. The black iron swords in the crown of the Kings of Winter seem to represent an alliance against the others, and Valyrian steel is black, and likely made with some combination of blood and fire sorcery. Jon also dreams of the Winterfell crypts regularly, so this connection might not be lost on him. But are there any other materials which dragonsteel could be? There are only so many special materials in the series, and we can go through them. We should note that, based on the symbolism present, we may want to pay special attention to materials that are black, made into weapons, or have an anti-spiritual property. Special materials beside Valyrian steel include weirwood, shade of the evening wood, ironwood, dawn, oily blackstone, fused blackstone, the other's weapons and armor, dragonglass, or some other material. First, while weirwood can be made into weapons, it is explicitly white, and incredibly potent spiritually, being the center of the old god's religion. Second, while Shade of the Evening trees are black, they are magical and not made into weapons. Also, with their black bark and blue leaves, Shade of the Evening trees appear to be more corrupted weirwoods than anything else. Third, while ironwood is black, it is also exceptionally rare, appearing only a dozen times across only 3 books, and we know very little about it. If you ask me, ironwood is probably some abandoned plotline, as most of its mentions only come from early in A Game of Thrones, but that's just speculation. Fourth, Dawn, the legendary sword of House Dane. While some argue that Dawn is the original Lightbringer, sword of Azor Ahai, for this analysis we should note that Dawn is pale as milk glass, but otherwise resembles Valyrian steel. Dawn was also forged from a falling star, which could mean anything, except that, in our history, meteorites were prized as a source of low-carbon steel. Even if dragonsteel was some black meteorite like the Bloodstone Emperors, it would still have required forging techniques that only came to Westeros with the Andals. Fifth, oily black stone. While black, oily black stone seems to be more Lovecraftian than anything else, and doesn't quite fit. Sixth, fused black stone. While black and Valyrian, potentially involving dragonflame in the making, like oily black stone, this doesn't seem to fit either. Seventh, the other's weapons and armor. While it would be poignant for the other's arms and armor to prove their own downfall, these tools are pale, mirror-like, and melt. Eighth, dragonglass. It's black, has dragon in the name, and is the only thing proven to kill another. Even so, Sam's accounts differentiate between dragonglass and dragonsteel. If dragonglass is dragonsteel, why not say so? So, out of all the other special materials, none quite match what properties we'd expect from dragonsteel. Dragonsteel is Valyrian steel then, right? Probably. There is one more material though, one that has been staring us in the face. Iron. The swords in the crypts and on the Stark's crown are iron. What's more, iron is said to be able to kill demons. While demon is often used to deride anything outside one's own religion, like the others, demons are said to take children, and Stannis directly refers to the others as demons. The others are also said to hate iron, which would make sense if iron could kill them. As for the others being impervious to most ordinary blades, those may be the first men's blades, that is to say, bronze. Either way, if dragonsteel is Valyrian steel or plain black iron, the last hero could not have had a sword made of it before the Andal Invasion. In summary, the Long Night likely coincided with or shortly followed the Andal Invasion because the last hero wielded a blade of dragonsteel. While dragonsteel's material is unknown, barring some more fantastical explanation like being a black meteorite, dragonsteel is likely either Valyrian steel or black iron, both of which only arrived in Westeros during the Andal Invasion. But, is there any other proof the Andal Invasion and the Long Night happened around the same time? Yes. As initially presented, Westeros' ancient history falls into three main periods: the Dawn Age, ending with the Pact, the Age of Heroes, seemingly ending with the Andal Invasion, and the period after the Andal Invasion. As for the Long Night, it seemingly happened sometime during the Age of Heroes. The wars went on until the earth ran red with the blood of men and children both. Finally, the wise of both races prevailed, and forged the pact. The first men were given the coastlines, the high plains and bright meadows, the mountains and bogs, but the deep woods were to remain the children's forever, and no more weirwoods were to be put to the axe anywhere in the realm. The pact began 4,000 years of friendship between man and children. In time, the first men even put aside the gods they had brought with them and took up worship of the secret gods of the wood. The signing of the pact ended the Dawn Age and began the Age of Heroes. So long as the kingdoms of the first men held sway, the pact endured, all through the Age of Heroes and the Long Night and the birth of the Seven Kingdoms. Yet finally there came a time, many centuries later, when other peoples crossed the narrow sea. Sam corroborates this, as he mentions how the Children of the Forest provided the Night's Watch with obsidian to fight the others during the Age of Heroes. It should be noted that this chronology presented by Luwin fits with the 8,000-4,000 year chronology for the Long Night and Andal Invasion presented by True History, an untrustworthy source. As expected, therefore, this chronology has several problems. First, the Age of Heroes contains fair-haired characters like Lan the Clever, despite fair hair being a decidedly Andal trait. The World of Ice and Fire even suggests that Lan was an Andal adventurer to avoid the possibility of Andals arriving in Westeros thousands of years before they supposedly did. This, however, would be no issue if the Andal Invasion happened during the Age of Heroes. Serwyn of the Mirror Shield, another figure from the Age of Heroes, is a knight, which are definitionally adherents of the Seven, the faith of the Andals. Andals are also present in the legends of the Night Fort, despite seemingly taking place during the Age of Heroes. Second, Storm's End is a castle built in the Age of Heroes, with a clear Andal influence and technologies that the First Men didn't yet have. Based on context, this seems to mean rounded walls, as Mo Cailin, a First Men castle, has no mention of any, or even the remains. Either way, Storm's End suggests that the Andal Invasion occurred during the Age of Heroes rather than after it. Finally, there's something I like to call the Ironborn chronology. Remember Euron Redhand, that Ironborn king said to live 5,000 years ago, the same time as the Andal Invasion? Well, Euron Redhand ended the Ironborn Kingsmoot until the main series. This means that Herrick Hor, a king raised by the Kingsmoot, must have ruled before Euron. Thing is, Herrick Hor's son, Ravos the Raper, fought against one King Theon Stark. Even if Herrick was Euron's direct predecessor, Ravos, Theon, and Euron would all be contemporaries 5,000 years ago. With that said, Theon Stark also warred against the Andals, further corroborating that the Andal Invasion happened 5,000 years ago. Since the Kingsmoot was still active late in the Age of Heroes, This means the Andal invasion must have also happened in the Age of Heroes. As for the Andals extinguishing the 1,000-year line of Euron Redhand, the 1,000-year gap between the Andals first arriving and invading the Iron Islands suggests that Euron lived near the beginning of the Andal invasion rather than the end. In conclusion, based off of Andals appearing in the Age of Heroes, Andal architecture appearing in the Age of Heroes, and chronology of the Ironborn Kings, the Andal invasion in all likelihood happened during the Age of Heroes, the same period as the Long Night. This, combined with mention of the last hero's Dragonsteel sword, likely either Valyrian steel or iron, points to the Long Night happening during or after the 1,000-year-long Andal invasion of Westeros. The Andal invasion coincided with the Long Night. But, did the Andals cause it? Returning to Bran 7, A Game of Thrones, we hear about the Pact, a treaty between the First Men and the Children of the Forest. In it, the deep woods are reserved for the children, and the cutting down of weirwoods with axes is forbidden. It should be noted that, from the children's perspective, the pact is made between the children and all of humanity, while for the First Men, it was made between the children and only them. So, what happened when the Andals, religious zealots ignorant of the pact, arrived in Westeros? Genocide happened. The Andals destroyed weirwoods and killed the children, driving them into the remotest parts of the world. Later, in Cersei 6, A Feast for Crows, we are even told that the Faith Zealots are called demon hunters. We actually get a description of one of these battles, at High Heart. The great hill called High Heart was especially holy to the First Men, as it had been to the Children of the Forest before them. Crowned by a grove of giant weirwoods, ancient as any that had been seen in the Seven Kingdoms, High Heart was still the abode of the children and their greenseers. When the Andal King Eric the Kingslayer surrounded the hill, the children emerged to defend it, calling down clouds of ravens and armies of wolves, or so the legends tell us. Yet neither tooth nor talon was a match for the steel axes of the Andals, who slaughtered the greenseers, the beasts, and the First Men alike, and raised beside the High Heart a hill of corpses half again as high, or so the singers would have us believe. True history suggests otherwise, insisting that the children had abandoned the Riverlands long before the Andals crossed the Narrow Sea. But however it happened, the grove was destroyed. Today only stumps remain where once the weirwoods stood. After slaughtering the children and First Men, the Andals hacked down the weirwoods with steel axes, a direct violation of the pact. And of course, to hide this fact, true history suggests that the children had already left the Riverlands before the Andals came, despite the accounts of singers. In either respect, Andal aggression drove the children into the remotest parts of the world. That would explain why, during the Long Night, the last hero had such trouble finding the Children of the Forest. If they had not yet fled, he could have just gone to High Heart or any other children's stronghold. This means the Long Night likely happened after the Andal invasion. But how do we get from the Long Night happened after the Andals invaded and violated the pact to the Andal invasion caused the Long Night? Well, in Bran 3 A Dance with Dragons, we see the children reduced to singing sad songs and accepting their fate. Now our sun sinks, and this is our long dwindling. The giants are almost gone as well, they who were our bane and our brothers. The great lions of the western hills have been slain, the unicorns are all but gone, the mammoths down to a few hundred. The direwolves will outlast us all, but their time will come as well. In the world that men have made, there is no room for them, or us. She seemed sad when she said it, and that made Bran sad as well. It was only later that he thought, men would not be sad. Men would be wroth. Men would hate and swear a bloody vengeance. The singers sing sad songs, where men would fight and kill. But the children fought the Andals at High Heart. They saw the Andals, humans, violate the pact. Who is to say they didn't swear a bloody vengeance? It's implied that the others were a creation of the Children of the Forest, likely a tool to use against the Andals. While potentially literal, the others hating iron can also metaphorically mean hating Andals. However, without a strict biological distinction between Andals and First Men, the others would kill both indiscriminately. In fact, in HBO's 2011 adaptation of A Song of Ice and Fire, the others were explicitly a bioweapon created to fight humanity which spiraled out of control. Finally, the world of Ice and Fire contains the following line: Mern III, the Madling, showered gold and honors on a Woods Witch who claimed that she could raise armies of the dead to throw the Andals back. Besides for exactly matching the previous points, Woods Witches, especially the Ghost of Highheart, seem to be agents of prophecy and the old gods, that is to say, the children of the forest. This legend of Mern and the Woods Witch may just be a legend, or it may be like nearly every other legend in our story, a cultural memory of something that actually happened. Either way, it is incredibly damning. In summary, during their invasion, the Andals waged war against the children of the forest, directly violated the pact, and drove the children to the remotest parts of Westeros, where the last heroes struggled to find them during the Long Night. Combined with evidence from the books and one corroboration from the 2011 adaptation, it seems likely that the others were created as a weapon to be used against the Andals, but instead began indiscriminately attacking humanity as a whole. So, where does this leave us? To summarize, the Andal invasion happened 5,000 years ago. Fleeing the Valyrian Empire, the Andals landed in the Vale and warred against the First Men, Andal Iron against First Men Bronze. As for the Long Night, its date within the Age of Heroes is uncertain, but there seems to be a concerted effort by Andal chroniclers to distance the Long Night from the Andal invasion in the timeline. Since, however, Andals and Andal technologies were present during the Long Night and the Age of Heroes, this means the Long Night and Andal invasion must have coincided. Combined with evidence that the Andals directly violated the pact, and the undead warriors were considered an option to combat the Andals, it's likely that the others were created as a weapon, ultimately leading to the Long Night. If I had to put everything in order, it would be this. Several thousand years ago, the war between the First Men and Children ended in the Pact, establishing the Deep Woods as sanctuaries and protecting Weirwoods, ultimately leading to old gods worship by the First Men. 5,000 years before the main story, the Andals fled to Westeros, starting a war of conquest against the technologically and culturally different First Men. The atrocities inflicted by the Andals against the Children and First Men ultimately led to the creation of the Others, a biological weapon which spiraled out of control and began killing humans indiscriminately. This resulted in a last alliance between Andals and First Men, led by the last hero wielding an Andal sword, likely Valyrian steel or black iron. There's also a chance this last hero was a Stark, as the iron swords in the Winterfell crypts and on the crown of the Kings of Winter seem to represent this Andal First Men alliance. Shortly after the Long Night, the Temple of R'hllor created the prophecy of Azor Ahai in case of the Others' return. A little while later, Night's King was discovered to be sacrificing to the Others. For his crime, his memory was damned, demonstrating a continued zero-tolerance policy for anything remotely related to the Others, even generations after the Long Night. Fearing future retribution, Septons and Maesters separated the Long Night and Andal invasion in time to hide the Andals' culpability, most notably through the work True History. This in turn resulted in multiple timeline inconsistencies, such as Andals, Knights, and Andal technologies being present before they came to Westeros. Future edits pulling the Andal invasion even further forward in time seem to be overcorrections meant to further obscure the past. Compared to this though, what is the null hypothesis? Well, if the Andal invasion and Long Night are completely unrelated, then the historical disconnect between the Age of Heroes and the Septons writing about it is only a curiosity. The fact that these chronicles are written by religiously biased Septons is irrelevant. The cultural differences between the Andals and First Men have no deeper meaning. The religious motivations for the Andal First Men War are also meaningless. The sharp dichotomy between Andal Iron and First Men Bronze is mere happenstance. The fact that Iron only came to Westeros during the Andal invasion is a historical anecdote. Robar Royce's Valyrian steel sword indicates nothing. The pairing of bronze and iron alongside ice and fire in Jojen and Mira's vow is just flowery language. The iron swords in the Winterfell crypts and on the crown of the Kings of Winter have no deeper meaning. The unity of these metals fighting against the cold and the cold representing the others is mere coincidence. Oral histories are just wrong compared to written histories. The actual timing of the Andal invasion is completely unknown. The Andal invasion happening the same time as the prophecy of Azor Ahai is either false or a coincidence. The legends the singers recorded about the Others and the Long Night are just legends. Night's King seemingly living after the Long Night is just a story. pattern of timeline discrepancies introduced by true history is random chance. The presence of Andals and Andal technologies during the Age of Heroes are just historical errors. Marwyn and Lady Dustin are just paranoid about Maesters and possibly Septons conspiring to change history. Martin's comments about the timing of the Long Night are just author error. The last hero's Dragonsteel sword is legend without basis. Davos and Stannis' comments about Iron killing demons and the others being demons are just turns of phrase. The Andals actually didn't break the pact and genocide the children, and if they did, it wasn't like that, and if it was, then it didn't matter. The hints that the children created the others aren't really there, and it's pure coincidence that a legend exactly matches the reason for the others' creation in the 2011 adaptation. At some point, the evidence to the contrary simply cannot be ignored. Of course there's a deeper meaning to the Crown of the Kings of Winter, to the difference between Andals and First Men culture, to Jojen and Mira's vow, to the bias of historical sources, to the timeline discontinuities, to the consequences of breaking the pact, and the similarities between the Legends of Mern and the 2011 adaptation. The Andal Invasion caused the Long Night, or at the very least coincided with it. I hope that this analysis has been enjoyable, or at least made you think about certain parts of A Song of Ice and Fire in a new way. Special thanks goes to the Search of Ice and Fire database, without which this project would scarcely have been possible. I would also like to thank Whispering Wells for platforming my analysis and helping it reach all of you. I also have my own YouTube channel, The Season of Spring Returning, where I publish chapters and analyses from my fantasy book based on the archaeology and history of the ancient Mediterranean. If you have watched this video to the end, again, thank you. Thank you.